Black Myth Wukong is an extremely AstroTurf title that nobody cares about, nobody's playing, nobody is buying. It is essentially the new Pow World, the new Elden Ring, the new Baldur's Gate 3, right? This is the new strategy, at least for up and coming Western studios, is just to buy a bunch of bots, shill message boards, and try and push this narrative that this game has some kind of like the antithesis to Western video game development. Asian developers are aware that Western gamers are sick to death of DEI and woke culture and just the declining products of games and are just leaning into that with their marketing, right? We saw that with Stellar Blade, which ended up bombing and only 1 million units sold. And we're seeing that with Wukong, where people are claiming that this is like one of the big success stories of the year, but when you're comparing it to something like Power World or Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3, like you know how this is gonna end. This thing is gonna come out, it's gonna be like obsessed over by weirdos online, and then it's immediately gonna be forgotten about. Wukong is so irrelevant that I don't have a single video making fun of it or its developers on this platform. And I probably should have addressed this when I realized that this was going to be an issue. Like, it's the same thing with Power World, right? Where, well, I actually did get around to making a video about Power World before it came out, but like, it was the same kind of thing where I could see that people like Angry Joe were disproportionately focusing on this stupid game from a stupid developer in a Chinese country, right? You know, a country that cannot produce good video games because of their demographics and because of like how things are done there, right? Like I saw Angry Joe shilling this game years and years back, and it dawned on me just how willing he was to ignore all of these far superior Nintendo games that were coming out around the same time in order to prop up this thing that wouldn't be out for another 3 or 4 years, right? It was very similar to Cyberpunk 2077 in that way, where the length of time it would take for this game to come out, it doesn't make sense to get excited about it. It doesn't make sense to cover it. It doesn't make sense to care, especially when you have way better games that already exist coming out on Nintendo platforms. And that is kind of the issue I have with like the anti-woke thing in general, because when you have something like Tears of the Kingdom, which has no woke elements at all. In fact, stripped away the elements that woke audiences latched onto in the first game. Like when you have Tears of the Kingdom, which is so traditional, such a great innovator, like so incredibly fun to play. You know, over 100 hours of gameplay, right? Tears of the Kingdom is one of the best games ever made, objectively. And yet these same people that are worshiping something mediocre like Black Myth Wukong are bending over backwards, doing everything they possibly can to not acknowledge that Tears of the Kingdom even exists, that Nintendo as a whole even exists, right? You know, how often do we see the same group of people like worshiping Black Myth Wukong just ignore Super Mario Bros. Wonder, ignore Super Mario Bros. Games? No, not only just ignore them, but actively sabotage them and try to create this narrative that nobody was talking about these games. When really all of them pretty outhandedly performed games like Power World or Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3. Like, again, Nintendo is dominating the industry right now because of how good they are at making games, right? But the gamer culture refuses to acknowledge it, right? Gamer culture is doing what it's always done and is simply jumping from PlayStation developer to PlayStation developer, desperately trying to find something that will like catch on with the mainstream, right? You know, back in the day, it was like, Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, and then those franchises fell off, and they had to latch on to like, I don't know, Ratchet and Clank, Jack and Daxter, Grand Theft Auto, and those franchises fell off, right? You know, And they had to move on to Uncharted and The Last of Us and God of War, and then those franchises fell off. And meanwhile, Nintendo is not only putting out like uh, all of their classic franchises fairly regularly, they're also innovating with brand new ones, right? The difference in quality between Nintendo and the rest of the industry is palpable. It is very noticeable if you like even take like a second of time to really take it in. To me, seeing people like freak out over a Journey to the West adaptation is just absurd, right? To me, it's just like, why exactly, what exactly does this game do that's worth my time or attention, right? To me, all the hype and enthusiasm about this game, much like it was with Stellar Blade, much like it was with Cyberpunk 2077, much like it was with The Last of Us, or Uncharted 2, or Halo, or Portal, or Bioshock, it's all fake. Right? Like, there's no real, like, hardcore gaming enthusiast about this product. It's just something that people are worshiping in order to keep the discussion away from actual superior Japanese game design, right? Again, this is the core issue. This has always been the issue, is that people aren't willing to admit where the real games are. People aren't willing to admit what the best hardware is. People aren't willing to acknowledge Nintendo as the dominant force in gaming. And that is why so many people have been taken aback over the decline of content in games anymore, right? Like, they realize the games are bad, they realize they're getting worse, but they can't like make themselves face the music and like admit to why, right? To them, it's a political thing. To them, they have like managed to delude themselves into thinking this is like DEI woke culture just infiltrating the every video game studio in existence. But like, the reality is Nintendo is simply better than the competition, right? This is what people aren't willing to acknowledge, is that it has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with like woke culture, right? It has nothing to do with like that the gaming journalists or who's running these companies. Like, the reality is Nintendo is simply better than the competition because they've spent a significant amount of time investing in real talent and developing games for a wide range of audiences, right? This is better than what other corporations are doing. And the simple fact of the matter is that gamer culture does not want to admit it. And as a result of that, you should have no respect at all for gamer culture and what they stand for.